Hello and welcome back to SelfiGaming. SelfSustained here again, and we're going to do yet one more Paladin setup guide. Today we're going to set up our Paladin for Retribution, the Paladin's pure DPS spec. In Retribution, or shortened as RET, there are a couple things different than the other specs in the sense that you have more seals at your disposal. In fact, this time around we're going to use a different seal. We're going to use Seal of Truth, causing your melee attacks to deal additional damage, as well as apply Censure to that target, Censure being a damage over time that stacks up to 5 times over. So we're going to stick with Seal of Truth, and 90% of the time or better. If you're in a situation where you have more than 4 combatants, or you're in a group AoE damage, you could switch that over to Seal of the Righteousness, and it gives you a little bit more AoE ability. We are going to stick with Blessing of the Kings for that group buff, unless somebody else in the group is offering it, and then you can switch to Blessing of Might. Now, overall, the Ret spec, I don't think I've ever honestly used. I don't do too much PvP, and I prefer to tank with my Paladin, so I don't really use it myself. So whereas I haven't went out and spent any time putting gear together yet, I'm still running around with my shield and one-handed axe. So I'm not currently geared, as you can tell, for Retribution. But we're going to go through it and give you an idea of the best way to put it together. And again, I'm using Icy Veins as a guidelines for setup here. And with that, we're going to move on to the talents. As you can see here, I've got my talents set up according to the way Icy Veins suggests. In Tier 1 here at level 15, they state that it's really more of your type of playstyle. There's actually, you could go Long Arm of the Law like I did, which is the successful judgments increase your movement speed for 3 seconds. Or I could have gone Speed of Light, which is the greater movement speed for 8 seconds with a 45-second cooldown at your disposal. You control when that happens. I like the way Long Arm of the Law works. With every judgment, I get that little extra speed. It kind of lets me slingshot into the group or around a mob, or I just like the way it plays, so I stick to that whenever possible. Tier 2 is more of your crowd control tier here, and you have the choices of Blinding Light, Repentance, or Fist of Justice. And again, whereas this tier is a bit of a user's choice, I stick with Fist of Justice for the additional stun. You never know, man. You'd be surprised how often a stun comes in handy, even if you're not in a 5-man group. At Tier 3, level 45, you get into utilities. So you have Sacred Shield, you have Eternal Flame, and you have Selfless Healer. Now this time, Icy Veins suggests Selfless Healer. As you can see, and it reads here, the successful judgment reduces the cast time and mana cost of Flash of Light by 35%. It also increases Flash of Light's effect on others by 20%. And this Selfless Healer stacks up to 5 times. Meaning, essentially, if you had a stack of 3 of this Selfless Healer, your Flash of Light would damn near be free and instant, as well as have a 60% increase of effect on party members. So that can definitely help a healer out in times of high damage. The next tier here at level 60 is your performance enhancing abilities. So your choices here are Clemency, gives your hand abilities 2 charges, Hand of Purity, which is an additional hand, or Unbreakable Spirit. And once again, like the other specs, Unbreakable Spirit is the go-to. It reduces the cooldown of your major mitigation abilities like Lay on Hands, Divine Shield, and Divine Protection. Cuts them in half. Excuse me. Which comes in quite handy, especially Lay on Hands is just an epic heal. With that, you go into the next tier at level 75, and you have some AoE abilities here. So you have Divine Purpose, Holy Avenger, and Sanctified Wrath. This time, you have the choices between Sanctified Wrath, or if you have better gear than I do, and you're raid geared, and you have a 2 or 4 piece tier 17 set bonus, Sanctified Wrath takes a little bit more of a hit than Divine Purpose. So at that point, you'd want to use Divine Purpose. But until then, I'm going to stick with Sanctified Wrath. As you see, as a red, it reduces the Hammer of Wrath's cooldown by 50%. Hammer of Wrath being that big boy you use whenever your target is at 20% or less health. Next tier at level 90 is your Execution Sentence, Holy Prism, or Light's Hammer. And in this case, whereas the red Paladin's damage is better in single target than it is in AoE, I thought I'd go with Light's Hammer to kind of bring up the AoE, make it just a little bit better than what they have otherwise. Not to mention, I like Light's Hammer. Again, it's the one that you throw down on the ground, and everybody standing inside it gets hurt if they're an enemy, or healed if they're an ally. Gotta love it. It's got a pretty decent range. 30 yards covers quite a few people, especially if everybody's stacked nicely. At level 100, you get your final tier, and this is a straight DPS boost. You have the choices of Empowered Seals, which is great if you're experienced Paladin and you would like to try a little harder rotation, as you can, with Empowered Seals, you can choose whether you'd have a better damage mitigation or better DPS, or if you're good at twisting the seals back and forth, you can actually hold both of them constantly. The other choice would be Seraphim. As you can see, it's got a 30-second cooldown that basically, for a full bar of 5 holy power, you are temporarily magnified in power, increasing haste, crit, mastery, multi-strike, and versatility by 1,000 for the next 15 seconds. So essentially, Seraphim will allow you to be beastly half of the time. But with that said, the option we chose, and again going by Icy Veins, they suggest Final Verdict for Ret Pally, as it's easier to use, and also like the idea that it increases the damage of your next Divine Storm by 100%. It also increases the Divine Storm's radius by 50%. It also replaces Templar's Verdict, so instead of having 2 verdicts, you now just have Final Verdict. As you can see, it takes maximum of 3 holy power, but this is your go-to if you're maxed out. If you have 5 holy power, this is the ability that you will hit to try and make sure that you're not wasting holy power. Not to mention that, again, using the buff factor for Divine Storm is quite helpful. Moving on to glyphs, there was a group of things that we could have chosen. I'll start with what I've got here, and then I'll just kind of touch on what's left in the list. So the glyphs I chose were Glyph of Judgment, so increases the range of my judge by 10 yards. Glyph of Divine Storm, which makes Divine Storm heal me for 4% of my maximum health. And whereas I'll be using Divine Storm every time I've got Holy Power, or most generally every time I got Holy Power, since it is the top priority ability. That's a nice little self-heal regularly. The third major glyph I'm using is Glyph of Templar's Verdict. You take 10% less damage for 6 seconds after dealing damage with the Templar's Verdict or Exorcism, which again is nice self-active mitigation. Some of the other choices would have been Double Jeopardy, which gives your judge an increase of 20% damage if you use it on a second target. Could have also used Mass Exorcism, that basically takes Exorcism, turns it into a melee, but an AoE melee. Causes 25% damage to all enemies within 8 yards of the primary target. Could have also used Divine Protection, which I believe I have up here. Yes, which is the one that takes the damage reduction of Divine Protection, and instead of it being 40% magic, it is now 20% magic and 20% physical. Makes it a little bit more utilitarian, if you will. Another option would have been Hand of Sacrifice, which basically just removes the transference of that 30% damage reduction that Hand of Sacrifice provides. Instead of it redirecting that 30% damage to me, it would have just reduced the damage by 30% flat, not redirecting it to anybody. So with that, I used, again, Divine Storm, Judgment, and Templar's Verdict. Now, as a Ret Pally, if you're in single target mode, you're taking on a boss or some other mob that has a lot of health points, but not a whole lot of helpers. Like I had mentioned a second ago, Divine Storm is your go-to when you have power. Or holy power, you will be using Divine Storm primarily if it is empowered by the fact that if anytime you use a holy power consuming ability, you have a 25% chance to make Divine Storm free and deal 50% more damage. So anytime it's empowered, you make sure you get that. That's free damage, no holy power needed. Beyond that, Final Verdict will be your holy power. Matter of fact, holy power is used by 3 things: Divine Storm, Final Verdict, or Word of Glory. Word of Glory being a heal for you or your party members. So 9 times out of 10, you will be using Final Verdict or Divine Storm. If Divine Storm is not empowered, you will use Final Verdict, which will then have a 25% chance of empowering Divine Storm. Kind of fun. Anyhow, as you can read here, Final Verdict takes a maximum of 3 holy power. It is an instant with a 10-yard range. It empowers your weapon with holy energy and performs devastating strike, dealing quite a bit. And as I mentioned with the glyph, or getting this in your talent tree, it increases the damage of your next Divine Storm by 100%. So Divine Storm can be empowered by the fact that, again, 1/4 of the time you use your holy power consuming abilities empowers your Divine Storm. Final Verdict buffs your Divine Storm. So again, say you just hit Final Verdict and it just happened to empower your Divine Storm plus buff your Divine Storm. Your Divine Storm will then be free and quite a bit larger and quite a bit harder hitting. So that the luck of the proc, if you will. Beyond Final Verdict for keeping yourself from wasting holy power, anytime you have 3 holy, you'll be using Final Verdict. Beyond that, your next would be your 6th tier ability, which in my case is Light's Hammer. Becomes 3rd in your priority list, followed by Hammer of Wrath if your target is below 35%. I know it says 20 there a little bit ago, but because I have the Sanctified Wrath. No, it is not Sanctified Wrath. Which one is it? Is it? Oh no, that's what it is. It is enhanced because I'm through leveling. Hammer of Wrath can now be used on targets below 35 rather than 20%. So that's what it was. Sorry about that confusion. After Hammer of Wrath, it's your holy power generation abilities, such as Crusader Strike on cooldown, Judgment on cooldown, Exorcism on cooldown. And then, like I said before, last but not least is Final Verdict anytime you have 3 holy power. So if you have 5 holy power, Final Verdict is only second in command by Divine Storm while empowered. But if you've got Exorcism, Judgment, Crusader Strike, you can't use Hammer of Wrath, you have your Light's Hammer down, then you'll use Final Verdict as soon as you get 3 holy power. And again, this is all for single target. I know it's kind of a little bit there to take in. AoE damage on the other side is if you have 4 or more targets, you can switch your seals over, like I mentioned, to Seal of Righteousness. Or if your targets have enough life points to live for more than 30 seconds, primarily. At which point, your AoE priority goes like so. Divine Storm, again, sits on top if it's empowered. If it's buffed by Final Verdict, it's second in priority. So if Divine Storm is buffed by Final Verdict, hit it. If it is empowered, definitely hit it. Then it comes Final Verdict to keep yourself from wasting Holy Power. If you have 5 Holy Power, you'll use Final Verdict. Followed by Light's Hammer, like before, your tier 6 talent. And then, instead of Crusader Strike, you're going to switch to Hammer of the Righteous, which is your AoE ability that generates Holy Power. Followed by Judgment on cooldown. And Final Verdict if you have 3 Holy Power. When you have your target at 35% damage or less, Hammer of the Wrath is more priority than Judgment. Not as much as Exorcism, but more than Judgment on cooldown. And the easy part of the Ret Paladin is you don't have a whole lot of cooldowns to keep track of. In fact, you really only have one cooldown to worry about, and that is Avenging Wrath. Now, Avenging Wrath, as you read there in the bottom right corner, increases all damage and healing caused by 20% for the next 30 seconds. Now, I've got it down here, which is off my main bar, but for good reason. If I come over here and grab this macro, you'll see that I have this macro set up to Final Verdict when I don't have any modification key, and Hammer of the Wrath when I do use a modification key like Control, Shift, or Alt. I can hold the mod key and it switches it over. But I've also got this to set Avenging Wrath as well as one or the other of those 2 abilities. So every time I click this, number 5 on my hotbar, I will either be hitting Final Verdict and Avenging Wrath, or Hammer of Wrath and Avenging Wrath, provided that Avenging Wrath is off cooldown. And with a 2-minute cooldown, that'll be quite often. So that makes it quite easy as a Ret Paladin to keep an eye on your cooldowns. You don't have a whole lot of multitasking or micromanagement to worry about. Other than that, you've got a couple other abilities that are nice to know. Paladin's general abilities, like I mentioned before, Lay on Hands, Word of Glory, Flash of Light, believe it or not, is actually a little bit more viable heals as a Ret than it is protection, Tank Paladin. You have your Divine Protection, your Divine Shield still. You have a new one called Emancipate, which unshackles your spirit, freeing you from one movement impairing effect, which can become quite handy. You also have your Fist of Justice, like I mentioned in the talent tree. It gives you that stun. You have Rebuke for spell interrupting, and you have Reckoning as a taunt. With that said, you also have your other abilities like Turning Evil. You can turn an undead, aberration, or demon target and have them run away, scare them basically, fear them away. But basically that's the primary priority of your Ret Paladin. And with that said, that should cover talents, glyphs, rotation, single and AoE, as well as your lowly little cooldown. And I would like to thank you again for stopping by. If there's anything that you're seeing that you think that I could do better, by all means, leave a comment below. If you like what you see, make sure to show some love and hit that like button. If you're new to the channel, a subscription would be greatly appreciated. Keep yourself in the loop of what's happening in SelfiGaming. Thanks again, and have a good day.